Hello everyone, Simpson2142 here reporting from the internal pits of Elo Hell, and today I want to talk about Junkrat. Why people seem to hate him as a pick for competitive, why I think they're wrong, and how you can best utilize him to his full potential. Now, I like Junkrat. He is a lot of fun to play, can deal out huge amounts of damage, and can harass enemies to the point where they may just start going as insane as him. So you can imagine how it grinds my gears when people don't see him as a viable pick for competitive. Junkrat unfortunately falls into the same pit as Bastion, Hanzo and Tourbillon, in that pros don't tend to use them and therefore no one else should ever use them at all. They're not part of the meta and you must suffer from severe learning disabilities should you think otherwise. Even if you happen to be doing an outstanding job, you can guarantee that if for whatever reason your team is losing, it's most likely down to you. I mean, sure, you're the one holding all the gold medals.
Don't you know Simpson2142 medals don't actually reflect play or skill and therefore don't actually matter to the overall structure of the gameplay?
Well, they do when they're synced. When you're holding gold for damage, gold for eliminations, and gold for objective kills, it does mean something. You are doing something right, and you should keep doing it right. Why don't you look at the Reinhardt who's charging into 6 enemies by himself? Why don't you look at the McCree who can't land shots for shit and is letting the enemy Pharah rain down on us? Why don't you look at the Ana who is playing a DPS sniper and has less healing done than the Zenyatta?
Why?
Sorry, I lost my cool there for a second. But my point stands. So why do people feel Junkrat is a poor choice? Well, to be fair to them, it's not just because pros don't use him. He is seen as a very situational hero, only being picked for defense where there are tight choke points. There he can spam corridors and hallways with his high splash damage grenades, causing large amounts of damage and essentially denying the whole area. Outside of this, he's seen as more of a liability. In open spaces, he is unable to land less of his hits and causes only what we call chip damage. This is where you can only inflict small amounts of damage at a time to an enemy, to which the enemy healers can quickly heal up and essentially get free ult charge. His grenades would also do a fantastic job at charging up Zarya's bubble shields, quickly giving her maximum charge on her primary weapon, which would easily melt through the rest of your team. Now, those are fair points, but we can first rule out the excuse of lack of pro players using him, as although there may be few pro players using him, professional matches at that higher level are completely different to regular matches at lower level, and should not be religiously followed, but that's another video all of its own. We can also counter the argument of charging Zarya's bubble shields. Zarya is not as great of a threat as she once was. The amount of charge she receives from damage to her bubble shield got reduced by 20%, so therefore she is actually being picked less in matches, and even if Junkrat does accidentally charge them, there is less consequence to this action. But the main argument against Junkrat is his use in limited situations. I think this is more down to people who are using Junkrat rather than Junkrat himself. The majority of players I see using him tend to play on defense maps, staying at the back line, spamming his grenades over long distances, not really landing any of their shots, causing chip damage, and not really contributing much to the team at all. This is wrong, and in that situation I would suggest opting for another hero that you could potentially be more effective with. Now, what I've tried to do is get a series of clips together in the background which show me using Junkrat on defense, using him on attack, and using him on King of the Hill, highlighting how he is not just a hero for tight choke points on defense. Now, there are two very different ways you can utilize Junkrat. The first being straight up damage dealer. This is a simple strategy but does require fairly high skill. Rather than staying at the back line and firing Junkrat nades from a distance, you want to be much closer to the action on the front line and trying to land direct hits with Junkrat's grenades. When an enemy is caught in Junkrat's splash damage, it can cause 13 to 80 damage. When they get hit with a direct grenade, it causes an instant 120 damage, which for squishy heroes that only hold 150 to 200 health points, that is going to sting. Not only causing them to panic and retreat from the front line as they search for health, but also making them an easy picking to finish off from the rest of your team. Remembering that Junkrat's grenades are a projectile and therefore have a larger hitbox, it's actually a lot easier to land those direct hits than you think, despite some of my appalling aiming in the background. The trick is just trying to lead your target and predicting their movement. But what really makes Junkrat effective in close range is his concussion mine. Dealing a maximum of 120 damage, this is fantastic for finishing off low health heroes, and because of its large size, it is far easier to land a direct hit with this than your grenades. You will see how often I catch squishy DPS targets off guard with a quick flick of the concussion mine, making Junkrat a surprisingly good counter to pesky heroes such as Tracer and Genji. And even if the concussion mine doesn't manage to finish an enemy off, it can cause huge amounts of knockback, throwing the enemy players off and being able to break up tight-knit groups. And speaking of his abilities, let us not forget about his steel trap, which for maps like King of the Hill you can just throw down on the control point where there is high levels of activity. Any player that is foolish enough to step into the trap will not only be dealt an instant 80 damage, but will also be held still for 3 seconds, giving you enough time to land a couple of grenade hits along with a concussion mine. Any damage you fail to dish out will no doubt be made up by the rest of your team. With King of the Hill capture points often being so chaotic, players neglect to see the semi-hidden trap, providing you with plenty of opportunity to dish out the punishment. Now let's talk about his second method of play, and that's to be a semi-flanker whose purpose is to harass the back lines of the enemy team. This is primarily for attacking and defending maps. What I see people failing to do is fully utilising Junkrat's mobility. Using his concussion mine, you can propel yourself to higher ground. It is up here that Junkrat performs at his best. Using the firing arc of his grenades, you can easily bypass the heavy walls of defence provided by the enemy's tanks, and cause havoc for the supports sitting at the back. With supports only having a health pool of 200, they will quickly begin to panic, either retreating to recover their health or pitifully attempting to shoot back at you. Either way, it distracts them from keeping their fellow teammates healed. Pairing this new flanking Junkrat with another flanker such as Genji or Tracer is a lethal combination. Junkrat can create a massive diversion, inflicting reasonable amounts of damage on the squishy supports, whilst your other flanker swoops in to finish off the kill. Now, whereas I talked about his first method of play involving little strategy and high skill, this one is more of the opposite. You don't particularly need high skill with Junkrat, as you're not really aiming for direct hits, but rather just to cause chaos and confusion as you rain down your grenades. You do, however, need high strategy in order to correctly position yourself where you have an overlooking view of the enemy's back lines, but at the same time be relatively safe from someone trying to attack you. Pharahs, Winstons and Divas can be particularly problematic as they are able to easily get to you. It's always best to make sure you have your concussion mine at the ready to either knock them back or to propel yourself out of danger and back to the safety of your team. One final thing I will mention is that despite everything I've just said about Junkrat's potential, don't stick with him if it's not going well. Junkrat is vulnerable to long-ranged enemies, so if the enemy has a well-aimed Pharah, McCree, or even a Widowmaker, they're going to make your life very difficult with you having very little potential to counter, at which point it may be worth switching over to someone else instead. Well, thank you for watching, guys. I hope you found this guide useful. Let me know if there's any particular heroes you'd like me to cover in the future, but until the next one, take care of yourselves. Goodbye.